Hello there everyone and welcome to this video on Python programming. In this one, we're going to look at selection. And this is probably one of the most important constructs that we use in all programming languages. And you will definitely use this all of the time. It allows us to make decisions in our programs. And that's definitely a good thing. So we're going to jump into our code. I've got Visual Studio open. I've made a new project and I've called it selection. And off I go and create that. And here is my code window. So I'll just put the title at the top, selection. And basically what we're doing here is we're using the keyword if, and that's what denotes selection. So if something is true, then what we're going to do is we're going to carry out, I'll put the keywords in capitals, and we're basically going to do something if it's true. Okay, but if it's not true, then we end up doing something else. And then we end the if. But in Python, there's no end if in Python. We just leave it basically blank. So this is what we're aiming to try and achieve by the end of this video. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable. So I'm going to call it num1, similar to what we did in our sequence video. I'm going to say input. I'm going to ask them to enter your first number. So if you don't know what this is doing, this is creating a variable called num1, num2, and we're giving it the value, which is going to be an integer, so a number, whole number value, and it's going to just ask the user to enter the numbers, the first and second number. Okay, and then when we get that response from the user, store it in those variables. Now, Python 3 is very specific that you use the keyword if followed by the condition. Okay, you must end the condition with a colon. So you're going to see this in a second. And your next line must start with a single tab, okay, which is an indent. If you don't know where a tab button is, it's just above the caps lock button. So I write the word if, and notice how it goes dark blue in this IDE. And I'm going to write in there num1. So if number 1 is greater than number 2, and then we put a colon. Okay, that is how we write if statements. And then I press enter, it automatically tabs in for me. Now, if it doesn't do this for you, it probably means that you've missed something like a colon or whatever. And we're trying to get rid of these red lines. Now, the reason why I've got a red line here is because there's nothing in my if statement yet. So if I just put in there print, and I'll put here, print out to the console, your first number is bigger. Okay. And that's it. We don't put end if there. We leave that blank. Now, if I was to write anything that's tabbed in by 1, that means it belongs, it's got a relationship with the if statement above. But if I tab back to basically on line with the if statement, that means it's not connected to the if statement. Okay, and I'll put here print. Okay, so it's important to know that when we're not tabbed in, it doesn't belong to the if statement. Okay, now let's just test this and run it. So here we go. I've got some numbers. It says enter your first number, so I'll enter 10. All right, and then I'll say, okay, I'll enter 5 for the second one. So it says your first number is bigger, and then it says because this line is not tabbed, it is not part of the if statement. No problem there. So let's run this again then. And this time, if I put in there 5 followed by 10, notice that line number 13 doesn't print anymore. So by using an if statement, it allows us to react to whatever the user is doing. So because my first number was not bigger than the second number and it failed this condition, it didn't run this line. Okay? That line on number 15 will always run because it's not a part of the if statement. But now we've got a problem. What do we do if we want to tell the user if the number is not bigger? Well, we can use something called an else condition. So here on my if statement, I could write in here, tab out and write else followed by a colon. And I can write my message in here and say your first number is not bigger. Okay? And let's see if this runs again. So I'll just start this now. And we'll say, okay, your first number is 5, followed by 10. And notice now it says your first number is not bigger. So we can get custom messages depending on what we like here, what options are available to the user. Now I can get even more advanced than this. Now what if I wanted to compare another condition on another line? So if it says, okay, if it fails that one, try and do another comparison of some kind. Let me make this just a tad bit more complicated for you. Int input, enter your third number. Okay, so now we've got 3 numbers in here, num1, num2, and num3. And if I said, if num1 was greater than or equal to num2, make sure you don't forget your colons, print your first number is bigger than or equal to. And then what I'll do is I'll write this here, which is an elif. So we've seen that an if statement is for the condition. The else means if it's not true. So if this condition is not true, carry out this part. And this elif basically means it's basically a hybrid of the if and the else. It's an else if. And I can put in there different statements like num2 is greater than or equal to num3. And you still need colons if you're doing comparisons. So I've put a colon on there, and I can print this out now and say your second number is bigger than or equal to the, is it the third? Yeah, it's the third number, and leave that as it is. Now, if this condition fails, it will try this condition on line number 23. If that fails also, then basically it means, I like to think of this on line 25 like if all else fails, so if you failed all the conditions, then just carry out this one. So print your third number. Just trying to work out the logic in my head there. So, okay, so if your number 1 is greater than or equal to number 2, then your first number is bigger than or equal to number 2. Okay, then if that fails, let's try this one. So num2 is number 2 greater than or equal to number 3. Yep, your second number is bigger than or equal to the third number. And then if those fail, that means your third number is bigger than or equal to the second number. Pretty confusing. Doesn't really matter about the logic on these. Really, we're basically working out the fundamentals of our if statement. So if followed by a condition, else if, another condition, and else. Else is always come at the end, and you can only have one of those. Okay? You can have as many else if statements as you like, and you usually end the branching with an else. Like I said there, you always finish with an else statement. And we can even do something a little bit more interesting, I suppose. And we can use, we've already done a video on these, or Boolean operators, or logic operators as we've called them. So Boolean operators can also be used for multiple conditions. And we can say in here, okay, let's have a username. Let's ask the user to input a username. And we can say to them, input your username. We can do the same thing again. I'll just copy that just for speed. And I'll put in there password, input your password. And then I could use my if statements, nice and simple, and say if your username is equal to, so remember, single equals is assignment like I've used up here. So give this value over to this thing. When you use 2 equal symbols, it says compare this thing on the left to this thing on the right. So it's going to compare my username to John and my password. So I've used and here. So if you remember back to what and means if this condition is true and this condition is true, then everything will be true and allow us into the first part of the if statement. So there you go. There's my information, and I'll say print login. What am I doing? Losing my mind. That's what I'm doing. Login successful. Then you can say else. So if it's not successful, then it's going to be unsuccessful. Login unsuccessful. There we go. So I'll give that a go and just run this program. So a nice simple set of if statements. Enter your first number 5, second number 10, third one is 15. So your third number is bigger than or equal to the second number, correct. Enter username. Now it has to be exactly the same as what I've put in here. So John with capital J would work, and Barker with a capital B would also work. So my login successful because those two things have matched. And that is the basics of selection statements. So selection is just the formal term for if statements.